Greetings. I must confess, I was unsure if I wanted to make this video as the topic is, in my opinion, somewhat infantile. But I nonetheless figured ultimately that I should make this short video as part of an attempt to clear something up, just a bit anyway. What inspired this video is this YouTube community post which you see on your screen from Dante Fortson. He had shared a video by Faithful to God, and his caption introducing that video read in part as follows, quote, "This is what a pathetic has-been does, looking for out-of-context Facebook posts instead of asking me to clarify," end quote. So Dante is stating that Faithful to God could have and should have reached out to him for clarification on what was covered in the relevant video. And the video in question happens to be the one I narrated on the topic of Dante Fortson, Michael Heiser, and the Book of Enoch. The video itself received a comment along similar lines, presumably from a supporter of Fortson, perhaps a person who may have found the video after seeing Fortson's post, and the comment reads as follows, quote, "Why don't you ask Dante yourself what he thinks and believes and teaches? That is what I would do. I'm just saying," end quote. So just in case others agree, or just in case anyone else wants to tell us that we should reach out to Dante Fortson and ask him for clarification, I wanted to offer a couple of points which are worthy of note. First, as it applies to specifically the video in question, the request that we ask Dante for clarification is awkward because the last 3.5 minutes of the video show multiple attempts by multiple people to get Dante to clarify his line of thought, to no avail. I'd say he was unwilling to clarify his position, but I'm tempted to say he was unable to clarify his position. Whatever the case, more importantly is the fact that beyond that particular topic, beyond that particular video, we've made multiple attempts to initiate cordial correspondences with Dante Fortson, and he has consistently avoided such dialogue. So in this video, I'd like to show a few examples of such. Show a few examples of, attempts to get Dante to clarify certain positions he holds, attempts to ask him questions, attempts to initiate dialogue with him, and see how he responds. To begin, there's this Facebook post from March 23rd of this year. In that post, he presented two propositions which he had boiled down as significant from the sources that he had been consulting. First, that there were slaves who claimed to be Israelites, and second, that Judaism was quote-unquote native to West Africa, whatever that means. I assume he means that there were people in West Africa practicing some form of Judaism. Whatever the case, in the same post, he declared that none of the urban apologists had debunked these propositions. So I went ahead and wrote a reply to his post, which I suppose you can read here if you slow down the video or pause it at the relevant points, but I'll also share a link to the thread in the video description and people can look at it there at their leisure. In my reply, I asked some clarifying questions on what I felt were methodological points, and I also shared that one doesn't have to disagree with the propositions he presented, rather one can explore instead the line of thought that Fortson applies to those propositions, or the conclusions that he infers from those propositions. So Fortson replied to my comment, but he didn't really engage my points. Perhaps he didn't understand them, and he didn't answer my clarifying questions. Moreover, he stated the following to me, quote, "I don't care about your input about the black community. None of your damn business. Go cause division in your own community and keep your nose out of ours," end quote. Then, on the 25th of March, so this is a thread that comes 2 days later, after the thread that we just looked at, he posted this new thread which reads as follows, quote, "We really need to start shutting down and ignoring anyone that isn't black when it comes to what we believe. Stay out of black business and focus on your own damn community. We don't owe you any answers or explanations, and we damn sure don't need your permission or approval. These non-black people in black business are the reason we have so much division. Always a non-black face trying to push division. Vocab Malone and his kind are the enemies of all black people, not just Israel," end quote. In short, There were attempts to cordially engage Fortson's reasoning, and that included asking clarifying questions, precisely what Fortson and at least one of his followers thinks we should reach out to him with. But when those clarifying questions were actually presented to him, he quickly put up these arbitrary morphological restrictions on answering those clarifying questions or queries about his reasoning or whatever. Here's another post from the 25th of March, which opens with the following statement from Fortson. Quote, "Shout out to Bro Berean for exposing the white money behind Eric Mason. I said that from day one. It was racist white money behind this resistance," end quote. Then he proceeds to share a photo of Vocab Malone, David Wood, and other friends of theirs in the Christian apologetic scene. The juxtaposition of his caption and the photo seemed to imply that those men in the photo were paying Eric Mason. So I asked a clarifying question. I wrote to Dante the following, quote, "Is this post meant to imply that one or more of the men in that photo are paying Eric Mason to take the positions he takes? If so, what is the evidence for such a claim?" End quote. And what was Fortson's reply? He replied as follows, quote, "Stay out of black business," end quote. So there you see again an attempt to ask a clarifying question, and then, immediately comes this arbitrary morphological, requirement to set up a barrier to dialogue to provide an excuse for why he shouldn't have to clarify his position. Anyway, moving on, late last October, in another Facebook thread started by a different gentleman, I had left a comment trying to discuss the preliminaries of one's methodology for determining who is or is not an Israelite, and Dante Fortson left a comment in my subthread, but in reply to someone else. So since he was there in the subthread, under a comment by me, I decided to represent to him the sort of basic methodological questions which I had presented to him in months prior. But, when I had presented these questions to him previously, it was to no avail. So I asked him if he believed that paternal lineage was the sole determining factor in who is or is not an Israelite. And I asked him if he believes a person's morphology allows us to determine their lineage across millennia. These are important questions because when you start dialoguing with Israelites beyond the One West spectrum, you occasionally meet folks who don't put as much emphasis on paternal lineage. And you meet folks who put a lot of emphasis on morphology. It's funny enough, just recently, Dante Fortson shared a video by Teo Ministries in which they basically insinuated that a person could descend paternally from Jacob, but if he has the wrong morphology, if he's quote unquote white, then his descent from Jacob becomes irrelevant. He can't be an Israelite. That was the insinuation. I may get into that at a later time. But anyway, in this instance, Fortson refused to answer those clarifying questions regarding his approach, and instead he responded as follows, quote, "Oh, you still think I owe you an answer or explanation concerning anything? Go find a black person to speak to me on your behalf," end quote. Recently, Dante Fortson has been declaring that the urban apologist will be, quote, over by the end of 2020, end quote. That's an interesting prediction, though it requires some clarification as to what precisely he means by that. Because if it turns out that, the people he considers urban apologists are still around in 2021 and 2022, then will his prediction have been wrong, or will he say, that's not what I meant? So there needs to be some clarification. When a different gentleman made a similar prediction on Facebook, I asked him, likewise, how he defined urban apologists. And pardon the language here, but Dante chimed in with this eloquent and mature reply. He defined urban apologists, or UA, as, quote, uneducated a-holes, end quote. And again, I ask that you pardon the language. Moreover, elsewhere in that thread, when Dante co-signed the other gentleman's post, I asked Dante to clarify what he meant by UA, by urban apologists. And once again, his reply was the same bit of profanity, and again, pardon the language, but there it is on your screen, uneducated a-holes. This level of profanity and vulgarity is the kind of quality of reply that you might get back when you ask Dante Fortson a clarifying question. Now, before I close, let me share one more example, and this one is my personal favorite. Late last October, Dante Fortson shared on Facebook a video in which he discussed the pews at First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia, with Pastor Kelly Richardson. And just to be clear, in the video, he makes clear that the primary focus was on those pews. Ironically, while the video is well over an hour long, not once do they attempt to look at any markings on the pews. But relevant to this discussion, I wound up being mentioned in the video. Here, take a look at this clip, which is just under a minute long.
Even to give clarity on the pews, because the reason why I'm offended by vocab alone, for example, his whole goal is to try to take everything that is identified with us and try to make it into a talking point to prove that, oh, these are not the people of the book. See, they're trying to use this as they the Hebrew Israelite, all this other crazy stuff. So I just want to touch on a couple of things and knock down some of the lies that he put out there of taking me saying that I cannot read what's on the pews to saying that I can't read Hebrew and all this other stuff. And when I say I cannot read what's on the pews, I'm not the only one. Even his so-called person that brought him per se into the apologetics, Abu, made it clear that he can't read what's on the pews, and yet they're trying to say it's Arabic. So I want to just deal with that real quick.
Okay, so after watching the video, and especially with the part that mentioned me in mind, I went back to Fortson's, Dante Fortson's Facebook thread in which he linked to that video. And I left a comment noting that it's awkward to discuss the pews for over an hour, yet not once actually take a look at the markings on those pews. And then I responded to what Kelly Richardson had said about me and about Arabic being on the pews. So what was Dante Fortson's reply? He wrote the following, quote, "You're not black. Stay out of black business and go deal with your own kind and the BS you all are teaching," end quote. That is my favorite example of how absurd this is, because here we have Dante Fortson putting up a video in which specifically I'm mentioned, and yet he still declares that it's not my business because I failed to meet some arbitrary morphological requirement. It's honestly hilarious. Man, it's also sad. Now, as I close this video, I suspect that some will want to respond that Dante doesn't have to talk to us if he doesn't want to. And my reply to that would be to say, okay, fine, I agree. Dante Fortson is certainly free to avoid corresponding with us. He can choose to abstain from answering our clarifying questions. But if that's the road he's going to go down, then it is awkward to encourage us to reach out to him. Moreover, him putting up posts complaining that someone allegedly didn't ask him to clarify something, it comes off as mere public theater when you view it against the backdrop of him spending months refusing to answer clarifying questions. He's going to complain about someone not asking him to clarify something when people have asked him to clarify things and he's refused to do so. He actually gets really frustrated when people do so. So in short, we have tried to initiate respectful correspondences with Dante Fortson. However, unfortunately, he has made clear that he prefers that we not correspond. For the most part, his only replies have been exhibitions of his own frustrations, evasions, and the profanity you just saw. So with that, I'll close here. I apologize for the lowbrow nature of this video, and I'll try to get back to more meaningful topics in the near future. But I still look forward to the comments of others. And as always, God bless.